Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video we're going to be going over which Atlas passives you guys should be taking to get the maximum amount of currency out of your maps and how to use them in the new 3.15 reshuffled Atlas. So without further ado, let's get into it. So, I'm not going to talk about favorited maps in this video, but if you do want a bit of a tip, you can copy what I have favorited here, or alternatively, you can also just make sure you pick open layouts, as that is best for the lead mechanic, and you should probably be doing the lead mechanic in your high tier maps, as it does yield a reasonable amount of currency, but that's for another video. Anyway, let's get into the Atlas passive. So we're going to kick it off here with New Vastir. So over in New Vastir, we've still got Legion and Anarchy being the best two picks here, but if you can't do Legion, you can go with Abyss instead, as Legion obviously is a little bit of a tough mechanic to do, but overall, Legion is the pick. If you can do Legion and you can break out the Legions, it's going to be completely insane. Overall, it's a really good pick, and it really is the most compelling choice in New Vastir. The only other things you would consider are Anarchy, which can give you a little bit of extra currency, not insane, and Abyss. But yeah, Abyss is a little bit on the weak side outside of a few early days. So right now it's all about that Legion. So New Vastir. Note, I will point out here that there isn't too many open layouts here, which are really good. So we're going to go with probably alleyways or burial chambers. I believe that we also do have mud geyser there. So those are the three maps I do for Legion, if you guys were just wondering there, because I'd probably go with mud geyser personally, as it's a T16, it's super duper open, and it isn't too much of a pain to run. Obviously a downgrade from Dunes, but good nonetheless. All right, let's move on. Next up, we have Glennach Cairns. So Glennach Cairns is actually really good for beginner players. It's actually how I grinded a little bit of my currency this league and finished off the last few cards of my Headhunter. Incursion right now is absolutely crazy, and if you're interested on immediately how to use that, you can go check out my video where I talk about how I got my Headhunter. It's at the end, but Incursion is actually super duper effective, not only because the temple gloves, the Trapper temple gloves, are really expensive, but also because it drops a ton of maps, which you can sell to other players. It also drops a ton of currency from stuff like the currency rooms and stuff like that, but you also have a chance to get the Val Omnitech vials, which are really good as well. So overall, Incursion is super duper strong, and that's even on top of the fact that you can get double corruption chambers, which you can sell to other players, as well as sacrificial chambers, which you can use the PoE profit website to figure out which item is best to flip, buy the base and the vial, and then turn that into a better item and sell that on to other players as well. So tons of opportunity in Incursion, and it's really good, and that's why we take it here. The next one here we have is Ambush. This is definitely a pretty good, solid, just kind of gradual advantage kind of pick here. You get a few strong boxes every single map. On average, you're going to get one, but you can get, two sometimes if you get to activate your box twice, which is definitely super duper strong as well. Overall, the next point and last point you'd be picking up is going to be either Monumental or Beyond, which is basically going to either give you a 10% chance of the Legion, which is pretty strong, or it's going to give you a little bit of extra Beyond. I like the Legion personally, as I think that Legion is pretty valuable, but you can also go with Beyond if you'd like. If you're heavily into juicing, you would not go with Legion. You'd actually go with probably Beyond, the whole entire Beyond path, and go Beyond Strongbox, but most people aren't going to be juicing that hard, at least at the start of the league, so probably you're going to be going with Incursion and running all your Incursion missions in Glennach Cairns. Alright, next up, let's go into Valdo's Rest. So Valdo's Rest is the one area that took a nerf this league in the form of Diplomatic Escort. Overall, it's still really strong, especially in the early game, as you get a ton of maps from the King Harbingers and from Harbingers in general. So I still recommend taking this early on, as it's going to help with map over sustain and map sustain, especially if you're just trying to break into your first high reds. This is definitely going to be a big node to pick up, as it's going to add additional sustain to your maps. And in the end game, you're definitely going to be able to get a bit of value out of it, so I would be picking this up as well. Overall, the theme of Valdo's Rest is, though, that every single node is really good, depending on what you want to go for. They're super duper strong. The other nodes I've picked up here are Blight, so if you're interested in engaging with the Blight mechanic at all, Valdo's Rest is the place to do it. Coupling Valdo's Rest passives with like Gilded Blight Scarabs or something like that is incredibly powerful and is going to yield a ton of blighted maps, and if you can get the Watchstones on there as well, it's going to be even better. So very strong there. Alright, let's talk about the other options here as well because they are particularly strong too. So the other one we have is Betrayal. If you're planning on doing Betrayal at all, Valdo's Rest is the place to do it. I'm not currently engaging in Betrayal, but if you were to engage in Betrayal, this is the nodes you'd take. Perhaps dropping Harbinger or Blight, depending on which one you like more or less. Metamorph is also pretty damn good. If you can pick up some Metamorph Scarabs for cheap, you can spec into the Metamorph nodes here, and you can get some extra Metamorph juice as well. I would definitely recommend any of the nodes on Valdo's Rest. You really can't go wrong, but I would say Harbinger is very, very good in the early game. Moving on, Lira Arthain. Alright, so Lira Arthain is another one of those zones where pretty much everything is good. After testing last league, the Blight in Lira Arthain is worse than Valdo's Rest. However, it's still not bad. So if you wanted to do Blight as well in Lira Arthain, you definitely could. But overall, I wouldn't recommend it, and I'd go with some of the other passives in this zone instead. So Lira Arthain is the best place for farming red beasts. And red beasts are going to be quite expensive, specifically the Kraka Chimeral, which is the frog. It's basically going to be worth a lot of currency this league, as it's the primary way to craft endgame weapons, which is very, very good indeed. The other options I'd be going here with, which I have taken, is Heist. Heist is always popping off, and this league is no different. People are buying deception contracts and blueprints for a lot of currency, so getting some extra Heist lockers is very, very strong, and that's why I picked that up. And the other option here is Flash Breach. These are the best breach nodes on the tree, and they're absolutely completely insane. If you can run the breach nodes here, even if you just get a breach here and there in your maps, or if you go and buy breach scarabs, it's basically always going to be profitable. And if you combine that with watchstones, it's going to be even better. So yeah, breach, super duper crazy and very, very strong. So yeah, recommendations, Heist and Breach if you enjoy the mapping side of things. Bestiary is something that you have to target farm, and I would only encourage people to do that if they're doing a Bestiary farming strategy. So yeah, Breach and Heist is my picks here. Alright, moving on to Lex Proxima. So Lex Proxima right now is probably the weakest zone on the tree, but overall the best node here is Science. Science essentially allows you to cash in any sextet modifiers you have on traditional watchstones, which say gain X items from possessed monsters. Like there's a scarab one, there's a map one. So if you happen to be sextant in your maps and it's on a normal watchstone and you have Science in this area, you should quickly shuffle it over, put it in there, and get the extra value out of it. It's really, really powerful to do so. And in the early game, when you're not using craftable watchstones, Science is particularly strong. So yeah, I'd get Science even if you're in the end game. It's still really good. Science is really, really good for the very, very early game as well, as it possesses all the monsters and makes them drop a ton more rare items. So if you're just trying to scrape by doing a bit of Chaos Recipe, Science is very, very strong, and you can get a lot more rare items for your Chaos Recipe if you take Science. So super duper strong. All of the other nodes in Lex Proxima are basically just weaker versions of other areas, with the exception of the Delve nodes. So if you're a Delver, Lex Proxima is your zone. It basically is giving you just more Sulfite overall, and that's really, really strong, of course. So if you want to do Delve this league, you'll be sitting out in Proxima quite a bit, Lex Proxima that is, and you'll be taking the Delve nodes. But outside of the Delve nodes, the Breach nodes are worse versions of Breach from Lira Arthain, and the Harvest nodes are worse versions of Haewark Hamlet's Harvest nodes. So overall, it's just Seance and Delve. But if you wanted to put some points in, I'd put them into Harvest personally. So yeah, pretty good there. Moving on, what do we got next? Lex Ejoris. So Lex Ejoris is basically just straight up only two things that I would ever take. I would only ever take Delirium, which is particularly strong, and Harvest, and Metamorph. So Metamorph is pretty strong in the early game. If you're just starting out, I'd recommend going for Escaped Experiment as your first 2 points. And I would leave finest samples until much later, as it does make Metamorphs way, way harder, which can make them very, very lethal. So I'd go for Escaped Experiment as the first one, which can give you an extra juice. And then I'd go for the Delirium side of things, because you can get a bit of extra juice from the Delirium as well. So yeah, Delirium and Metamorph. The other nodes have been nerfed. For example, the Perennis ones got nerfed, and also Vile Oligarchs and the Incursion nodes here are, in my opinion, just worse than the Glennach Cairns nodes. So I wouldn't be going with them. So yeah, Delirium and Metamorph in Lex Ejoris. Next up, we got Turn's End. So Turn's End, this is another one of those areas which is particularly strong in the early game, specifically in white and yellow maps. If you're struggling for currency, the best nodes to allocate early, if you can get to them quick, are actually trespassers and exotic goods. This is going to drop quite a lot of just like, random currency and items, which can be very, very useful to you. It can drop stacks of currency, it can drop maps, it can drop, 5 and 6 links, it can drop all sorts of stuff like that. And I would highly recommend going for it as soon as possible. And it is definitely the first 2 points you want to take over here. And then after that, you would either go for Abyss, which is, not bad if you want to go down the Abyss, Stygian Vice farming route, which is okay. But most people, I imagine, are going to want to take Delirium. But Delirium is very much an endgame focused set of passives here. I think in the early game, it's better to take Abyss, but in the late game, it's better to take a Delirium. But if you're planning on playing endgame and you're going to be using the Zana mod for Delirium, you basically should just take Delirium to start out with, as it's going to save you money respecting it later on. Probably Invasion and Delirium are the best nodes to pick up here, with the Delirium ones most likely going to be the strongest picks for an endgame farming strategy, and the Invasion is super duper nice in the early game. Alright, so the last one up here is Haewark Hamlet. So Haewark Hamlet is particularly strong as well, one of the strongest areas in the tree. So the main three that you want to look at here are Ritual, Essence, and Harvest. For most players, the best picks are going to be Ritual first, and then Essence. Those are going to be the best, kind of just farm it out kind of strategies. If you're a crafter and you have knowledge about Harvest, you can drop Ritual or Essence to pick up the Harvest nodes. However, I think that overall, if you're not planning to engage in Harvest, it's probably best to just go with Ritual and Essence, as they're very, very strong on their own, and they do really, really scale very well, not only from the start of the game, but also in the end game. They're both really, really good all the way through, and you're going to get a lot of value overall from your picking up your passives in this zone. Alright, so I wanted to do a little bit of a recap here at the end and kind of talk about where I would go at what points in the story and the Atlas and the endgame in general. So I think for endgame farming, pretty much the king is going to be Turn's End with the Delirium farm, probably going to be on a tropical island map tile set as well. That would be my guess. With maximum juice, that's going to be in the very, very end game. Also, you could consider going Lex Ejoris, but I think overall the Turn's End is probably going to win out, as it does scale how fast you get to the harder content in Delirium, and also increases the amount of Delirium splinters you find in the area. So I would say Turn's End is probably the pick, and it also contains one of the best Delirium maps in the game, which is Tropical Island. So that's probably going to be a very, very strong endgame pick overall. Next, I would also point out Haewark Hamlet. Of course, Harvest is in the game. It's very, very strong. So if you plan on doing Harvest crafting at all in the end game or in the mid game, Haewark Hamlet is your place. And I imagine a lot of people are going to be hanging out here in end game. In addition to that, it also has Ritual, which is on the map device, and also very, very strong. Lots of people are going to be doing Ritual in the end game for big, big currency. They're going to be selling bases. They're going to be selling, the currency they get from it. And overall, it's going to be a really, really strong pick. And it's also here is Essence. Essence is also a very strong pick, as it is basically one of the primary crafting methods again, and it can be sold to other players for a huge profit, and there's already a few videos out on how you can do that. So super duper strong there. I imagine Valdo's Rest is also going to be a very, very strong pick for the endgame. Farming with Blighted Scarabs is going to be incredibly strong. And also Jun is always going to be relevant, as she has Ashling still on her. And Ashling is one of the most powerful crafting methods in the game. Overall, so very, very powerful there. So if I had to pick my top 3 areas, those would be the top 3, and that's where I think a lot of people are going to be hanging out. Honorable mention for Vastir and Lira Arthain. With Scarabs, they can be very, very strong as well, but they do require Scarabs to function this league, and overall I think there'll be less popular picks, but there will actually be some pretty good strategies in there as well. So we have a very, very diverse metagame for currency farming in the very, very end game, which is super awesome. So if you're looking for lots of different strategies, this league has plenty. Let's talk a little bit about the early game and where you should be farming early on to get some really good value. So the first place I wanted to point out here, as I mentioned, is exotic goods and trespassers. Just doing maps in this area very, very early on is going to be super duper good for you, as you can get a bit of extra juice from the invasion monsters. They do actually drop quite a generous amount of items, and it does really, really add up over a lot of maps. Of course, You're not going to get like exalted items, but it will help you get over a few humps. If you're just trying to grind out your first 100C for your first item, you should definitely consider these 2 passive points a priority. And then when you're running the maps in here, it can definitely give you some extra nice stuff. The other place that I would recommend going and heading over to early on is, of course, Valdo's Rest with the Harbingers. It can really help out with map sustain if you're getting stuck. Doing Valdo's Rest maps to get into the high reds, or to get into reds at all, it's definitely going to help you out a lot, as an extra Harbinger is basically, half a scarab every single map that you're adding to your map, which is definitely very powerful indeed. Basically running a juiced up map just for free, and it's also super duper nice. Okay, again, if you're kind of like probably around the mid yellows, and you're just trying to get into reds and you're trying to scrape together a bit of currency, Lira Arthain is also a very good pick. Getting additional heist contracts is really strong right now, and you guys should be selling them if you have them. So yeah, once you get into like the low reds, mid yellows, you should definitely be checking out Heist if you want to try and sell them on. Some of the Heists are worth 7C for the Deception ones, as long as you have a suitable item level. So that's really good, and you can make a lot of currency selling contracts to other players, doing Heist, or running them yourself. And blueprints generally sell for anywhere between 8 to 15C. So yeah, super duper nice for the early game. If you're just trying to scrape together a bit of currency, I would highly recommend it. Yeah, the other one here, which is particularly strong in the early game, is Escaped Experiment. Again, this one's basically a 50% chance to get a Metamorph Scarab. You don't get to pick the rewards, but it still is going to give you a decent amount of time, like catalysts or just random currency or map sustain, which is particularly strong. And I would definitely recommend picking up this one, as it's only 2 points, and then running some maps in this area. You're going to see and notice that you get some currency from this node. So definitely strong there. Those would be my top picks for the early game. So we've gone over all the regions, and we've gone over the early and late game and what I would do. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed the video. Definitely check out which maps to favorite, and I'll also be talking about how to go infinite on sustain of maps that you like this league in future videos. So hopefully you guys are interested in that. And until next time, until then, cheers.